Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this, you know Iran's behind it, finish them.
Welcome to the channel where we analyze what prominent speakers really mean with what they are saying.
They should have hell to pay for what they've just done.
Once again, the Middle East has erupted into violence. As a hot war is in full swing, another war, hidden in plain sight, takes place, the information war. You could also call it a war on information, on factual, credible information. Another word would be propaganda. A great example is an interview that Nikki Haley, former US ambassador to the UN and current presidential hopeful, recently gave to Fox News. Let's disregard for the moment that the interviewer violated the most basic rules of journalism, which is to provide the audience with an, if not neutral, so at least a balanced perspective of the topic at hand. Instead, I will focus on what seems, at least on the surface, to be a spontaneous speech from Nikki Haley that is laden with emotions and indignations about the Hamas attacks on Israel. But is that really so, or does Nikki have some ulterior motives when she basically calls on Netanyahu to commit what can only be described as genocide? If you follow me on this journey, you will discover that nothing is as it seems. My analysis suggests that Nikki's intentions are primarily driven by her ambition to secure the highest office in the nation. This, of course, transforms the interview from one about the Israel-Palestine conflict to simple opportunism. While Nikki's message is clear, the manipulation techniques she strategically applies in an attempt to rally the nation behind her are too, at least for someone who knows what to look for. And if you stick around, they will become clear to you too. So if you're new to this channel, welcome. If you're not, then you already know that I talk to influential and sometimes controversial thought leaders, and that when I analyze a person like Benjamin Netanyahu or Nikki Haley, for example, I apply analytical methodologies that are based on empirical evidence and scientific research. If you're interested in manipulation and deception, you will find quite a number of interviews with the world's leading scientists on this very channel and on my website. Now, are you ready? Are you ready for the emotional roller coaster that Nikki will put you through? Here we go.
Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this, you know Iran's behind it, finish them.
Facts don't change minds, emotions do. Every politician knows that, and so does Nikki Haley, or her scriptwriter. What you just saw was a segment taken from the Fox interview. I've chosen it because when a speaker strategically applies emotions to influence perception, as Nikki does here, it is referred to as emotional appeal or pathos. Pathos is one of the three classical modes of persuasion in rhetoric, alongside ethos, that's credibility, and logos, logical reasoning. If something is applied strategically, that means it's applied on purpose and with the aim to achieve a certain outcome. So how do we know that Nikki has included the emotional appeals in her speech strategically? Well, there are a couple of hints.
Just imagine that here the Israelis woke up and communities were bombarded.
Imagine. When a speaker uses the word imagine, it is often a cue that they are aiming at the audience's limbic system, that's the part of the brain that is responsible for our emotions. This technique is a common strategy in persuasive communication to evoke strong emotions and to create a vivid mental picture that aligns with the speaker's message or argument. Let's not forget, if you want people to kill each other, you need to appeal to the emotions, because no rational argument would be strong enough to make that happen. And here's how it works. First, you engage the audience by prompting them to imagine something, and you follow up with a description of graphic events. In Nikki's case, that is to mentally step into the picture of the horrific scenes that we have seen coming from Israel. And I'm not even talking about mirror neurons here, but we know it's a very powerful process. Then empathy is elicited. The use of imagine is particularly effective when the speaker wants the audience to empathize with a particular group or individual's experience. When Nikki says, "Just imagine when here the Israeli woke up," it has the strategic goal for her audience to empathize with the victims of the Hamas attacks. Again, a very powerful way to elicit strong emotions. Another requirement is to make the message as personal as possible. How do you do that? You guessed it right, by encouraging the audience to imagine a scenario, because this can lead to a stronger emotional connection between the audience and the message. Nikki even spells it out.
This should be personal for every woman and man in America.
And now it's really becoming interesting, because in rhetoric the word imagine is often used to set the stage for an emotional appeal. And what is Nikki's emotional appeal?
Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this. You know Iran's behind it. Finish them.
This is also where you can see that someone really thought about this speech. Nothing is spontaneous or coincidental here. But before we go on, just remember one thing. Emotions are key to unravel the strategy behind Nikki's speech. Now, we can view Nikki's speech also through another lens. Aristotle already defined 3 modes of persuasion: ethos, pathos and logos, and we will find all 3 of them in what Nikki said. Don't worry, I will not go too deep with this, I just want to make a point. Ethos is the ethical appeal. Nikki establishes the ethical appeal by evoking the credibility of the United States when she refers to the emotionally highly sensitive 9/11 attacks from 2001, and when she suggests that the US has a moral obligation to support its friends.
America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11. That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this.
She also triggers the reciprocity bias. That's a cognitive bias. You can look it up, but I will talk about cognitive biases in a moment. I had already mentioned pathos. Pathos is evoked through emotional language and vivid descriptions meant to elicit emotional responses from the audience. I think there's no question that Nikki applied pathos to the extreme.
Families were murdered. Women and children were taken hostage, dragged through the streets. The elderly were taken.
And then there's logos. Logos is usually established through seemingly logical reasoning, evidence, and rational arguments. We find them in Nikki's speech when she says, for example, that the US needs to ensure its enemies do not hurt its friends, or that the US should take actions to protect its own national security.
And what we have to understand is this is the reason that we have to unite around making sure our enemies do not hurt our friends. America can never be so arrogant to think we don't need friends, just like we needed them on 9/11.
It seems logical at first, but how a localized conflict on the other side of the Atlantic and more than 6,000 miles away is affecting America's national security, that's something Nikki leaves open. So these are persuasion strategies, and Nikki uses them strategically, meaning purposefully, to influence her audience's perception. With what aim? That's something we will explore later. But there is another way for you to verify if a speaker tries to manipulate you, and it touches on one of my favorite topics, evolutionary psychology. No, don't get spooked, just give me a moment to explain. Evolutionary psychology describes cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are mental shortcuts our brains take when we are making decisions. They can be very quick, but they're not always right, because when we use them, our brains rely on patterns and stored programs rather than on slower cognitive processes such as thinking. These biases, and there are many of them, can virtually affect how we see the world, and believe it or not, they largely determine the choices and decisions we make. Now guess what? PR companies, corporations, and politicians know that. If you want to learn more about cognitive biases and evolutionary psychology, I interviewed the CEO of a German PR agency that focuses on evolutionary psychology to guide consumer behavior.
Emotions are really vital for us. If we haven't any emotions, we're not going to decide anything. So if we want people to decide for our brand or against our brand or for a message against something, we need to add emotions. We're actually not able to make a mere rational decision. It's not possible. There are always emotions involved. However,
the point is that speakers or speechwriters can address your cognitive biases without you even noticing it, because all of this happens on the subconscious level. Remember that. And you don't have to take my word for it, just go to the website of the Harvard University and do some of the implicit association tests that you can find there. If you do, let me know how that went, because you might be in for a surprise. Now, how does all of this relate to Nikki Haley? Well, I will show you 3 specific elements in Nikki's speech that were designed to trigger specific cognitive biases in her audience. Confirmation bias. Nikki describes the scenario where Israel is under attack in much detail. Families are murdered and the enemy celebrates.
Because when they did this surprise attack, when they took these hostages, when they murdered these families, they were celebrating. And what were they celebrating? They were saying death to Israel, death to America.
These descriptions can trigger confirmation bias because most of the Western public has been pre-exposed to a consistent messaging that portrays all Arabs, and especially the Palestinians, as terrorists. Simply put, confirmation bias is when we tend to listen to and remember things that confirm what we already think and believe. It's like when you only pay attention to the parts of the story that support your opinion and you don't consider the parts that might challenge it. And when I say you, I mean your mind. Your subconscious mind is making these selections without you being aware of it. Again, remember that. The problem here is that when under the influence of the confirmation bias, all Palestinians are viewed as murderous terrorists, which is exactly what Nikki is doing to justify the carpet bombing of one of the most densely populated civilian areas on this planet. Availability bias. And as if the confirmation bias would not already be strong enough, it is getting amplified by the availability bias. The availability bias is when our brains believe something is more common or important just because it's the kind of information that we remember easily. Now guess what? Through the constant and consistent messaging of Arabs as terrorists, it is no surprise that our minds fall victim to the availability bias. Another really important and very strong bias is the in-group, out-group bias, especially in the context of war. In-group bias is when we tend to like and trust people who are part of our group more than those who are not. Your group can be your friends, family, or people who are similar to you in some way. Like, for example, supporting the same sports team or music band. It's like when you cheer for your favorite team and you really want them to win because they're your team. You might feel like they're better than the other team, even if you don't know much about the other team. In-group bias can make us feel more connected to our group, but on the flip side, it also allows us to rationalize war on people that we perceive as the other. One of the most renowned experiments on in-group and out-group bias is the Robbers Cave experiment. In this study, boys at the summer camp formed intense in-group bonds and, as a consequence, became extremely hostile towards the rival group when the researchers introduced competition. This shows us how little it takes to create conflict and how in-group identities can lead to war. It also tells us a lot about the Israel-Palestine conflict. But coming back to Nikki, how does she invoke the in-group bias? How does she attempt to make the combined people of America and Israel the in-group? I spend a little bit time on this one because it is important for the point I want to make, which is that nothing in this speech is accidental. On the contrary, it is well planned and serves a specific purpose.
Hit Israel. This should be personal for every woman and man in America. Why? Because when they did this surprise attack, when they took these hostages, when they murdered these families, they were celebrating. And what were they celebrating? They were saying death to Israel, death to America.
Here, as said, Nikki tries to establish the people of both America and Israel as the in-group because they face a common threat, and she suggests that the enemy's actions and hatred are directed at both nations.
That's why Ukraine needs us when Russia's doing this. That's why Israel needs us when Hamas and Iran are doing this.
And here Nikki extends the in-group to the Ukrainians and expands the out-group to Iran and Russia. Again, this is strategy, not accidental.
I'll say this to Prime Minister Netanyahu, finish them. Finish them. Hamas did this, you know Iran's behind it, finish them.
This is the most remarkable statement I have heard in a while, especially considering it comes from a former ambassador to the UN, the United Nations. Do you see the irony here? Nikki is urging a strong response against the perceived enemies of Israel, that's Hamas and Iran, and portrays Israel as deserving support in dealing with those threats. Without explicitly spelling it out, it is still clear who is the in-group and the out-group here.
Now's the time to come together and say we need to unite for our brothers and sisters.
That one is a classic. Brothers and sisters. How more in-group evoking can you get? And then she goes on to call for unity among Americans and Israelis and suggests a shared mission, not just for Israel's benefit, but also for the broader principles of freedom and democracy.
In Israel, we need to unite for freedom. We need to unite for democracy all around the world. And we need to unite America because we can never think that this won't happen to us on our soil.
That's what leaders do when they want you to go to war. Remember Iraq and Afghanistan. They used the argument of spreading what they call freedom and democracy as a pretext to kill and impose their will on other people. And the last example that I mentioned is, in my opinion, the most devious one, because Nikki uses the 9/11 attacks, which are still an open wound in the American psyche, and which gave rise to more than 20 years of non-stop war with virtually millions of dead, as an emotional blackmail for the next war that's already in the making. But it's effective.
It's just like we needed them on 9/11.
The bias that she evokes here is the already mentioned reciprocity bias. While you may think that a company that gives you a product sample simply wants you to test their product, the strategy behind this gimmick is a different one. In reality, what they do is they evoke the reciprocity bias. Reciprocity bias is when people feel the urge to return a favor. It's like a friendly, you scratch my back, I scratch your back idea. And it works. But the overall message is clear. When our in-group faces a threat, we come together. There are a couple of other cognitive biases that I will not discuss, but do you see what Nikki Haley is trying to do here? Do you see that there's a strategy behind what she is saying? I mean, over and beyond the obvious. And now let's talk about emotions. From an evolutionary psychology perspective, politicians manipulate emotions because deep within our primal brains, emotions have always been the secret mechanism for triggering and stimulating action.
All of this has happened in front of everyone, on top of thousands of rockets that hit Israel.
Our ancestors thrived through tribal cooperation, and emotions were the currency for building trust, securing their place in the dominance hierarchy, and virtually rallying the troops.
And what were they celebrating? They were saying death to Israel, death to America.
In the cutthroat world of politics today, savvy leaders like Nikki Haley consciously tap into these ancient wiring systems to manipulate public opinion. Emotions are crucial for stirring up collective fervor, like what we saw in the US and Israel at the moment.
this is not just an attack on Israel, this is an attack on America, because they hate us just as much.
It's a high-stakes game of power and primal instincts, and only those who can manipulate the emotions of the masses with finesse can emerge victorious in the battle for votes, loyalty, and political dominance.
This is not just an attack on Israel, this is an attack on America, because they hate us just as much.
But there is another element that makes the purposeful infusion of emotions into a discourse so attractive for politicians and other manipulators. Exposure to strong emotions can significantly impact your capacity for rational thinking.
And we need to unite America because we can never think that this won't happen to us on our soil.
And guess what? When our rational thinking process is impaired by strong emotions, we are not only much more receptive to the manipulative messages that are pushed, but they also have a much greater effect on us. Which of course is exactly what is intended with this method. In these various clips that you just saw interspersed between what I said, which emotions do you think Nikki tries to evoke? Right, fear and anger. And why? Because fear and anger have the greatest impact. Fear is like a wildebeest that can hijack your logical thinking. It clouds your judgment, narrows your vision, and triggers a knee-jerk avoidance of risk. Anger, on the other hand, thrives on tunnel vision, impulsivity, and cognitive biases, which leads us down the dark alley of irrationality. It even warps our memories and numbs our empathy. While in the grip of anger, our brains are flooded with stress hormones and reject any kind of calm analysis. In the face of fear and anger, we are literally not ourselves. Do you see why Israel succeeded in mobilizing the largest reservist army since 1967 virtually overnight? Compare this to the vast numbers of fleeing Russian and Ukrainian men who tried to jump being drafted. And before you crucify me for implying that the volunteers and reservists of the Israeli army are irrational, think about it this way. Take away your emotions and what do you see? Where lies the root cause of the Israel-Palestine conflict? So do you think that annihilating Gaza with huge costs to Israel will address the actual root cause? But then again, you're not supposed to think. That's why Nikki throws all these emotions at you. That's why she wants you to imagine the horrible things she described, because only then will you accept what she and her pals have in store for you. Okay, but what is it that Nikki Haley really wants to achieve with speeches such as this one? Let me know in the comment section below. I will ask you again at the end just to see if you've changed your mind. To answer this question, you have to consider the context. 2024 is an election year and Nikki makes a bid for the presidency. She is not only up against Joe Biden, who is more and more perceived as weak, I wonder why that is, but more importantly also against Trump. So let's have a look if we can find evidence that Nikki's strong rhetoric is nothing but a gimmick to win election. But before we do, you have to know that political strategists employ a wide range of tactics and strategies to increase their candidates' chance of winning. Some of these strategies include policy promises, addressing fear and security concerns, and what's called negative campaigning, for example. Do we find any of those in Nikki's speech? Yes, we do. Let's go through them one by one. By now you should have realized how important emotions are in this story. You also should have realized how emotions are used to manipulate you, and that's especially true when it comes to elections. Political strategists, of course, know that and try to create what's called emotional appeal. Remember, we talked about emotional appeal already in the context of pathos, one of Aristotle's 3 modes of persuasion. When a speaker shares gripping stories about real events, it evokes strong emotions in people. These emotional stories make the audience feel deeply connected to the speaker because they can relate to the speaker's values, visions, and emotions. That's called emotional appeal. There's even a physiological component. That's again the mirror neurons. Look them up. But this emotional connection is crucial, of course, if you want to win an election, because when voters feel a strong connection to the candidate, they're more likely to support and vote for them. Okay, next, and also an important one, the appeal to nationalism and identity. Nikki makes sure to emphasize that when Israel is attacked, it's also an attack on the United States. This, of course, has nothing to do with the 60 million or so evangelicals in the US that support Israel, or does it? But it makes people proud of their country and more connected to her. In an election, this connection is important because when people feel a strong sense of patriotism and unity with a candidate, they are more likely to vote for them. And then we have negative campaigning. It's something so obvious that I was hesitant to even mentioning it. Negative campaigning is simply when a speaker criticizes the current leader, basically saying, hey, he's not doing a great job. This is always a powerful move in an election because it undermines the current leader and it tries to make the people think we need a change and this candidate is the one who can do it. So Nikki did not neglect to send a couple of blows to Joe Biden.
So if we know that, what we have to do is start being strong. You're not strong by giving them $6 billion like Biden did. And he can say it's not in their banks, but they're moving money around because they know it's coming. You're not being strong by lifting sanctions like Biden did.
Another one, fear and security. In the world of elections, fear and security are the secret weapon. Again, emotions. The speaker raises concerns about threats and implies we need a strong protector. It's like a suspenseful movie where the hero steps in to keep everyone safe. So when Nikki talks about those terrible Hamas terrorists, she not only evokes some deep-seated fear, again emotions, but she makes you think we need someone strong enough to shield us, to protect us from those terrorists, and that someone is her. But for a population that has been desensitized after decades of permanent war, one enemy is no longer enough. The stakes have to be higher, much higher. That's why Nikki throws in Russia, China and Iran as one entity that is joined on the hip. Do you start to see how this all fits together? Do you see that there is a strategy behind all of this? I got two more. First, moral appeals. They're also a standard persuasion tool when it comes to election. Imagine, and now I'm doing it too, imagine the election stage as a showdown between good and evil, which is virtually how Nikki frames it.
If ever there was a time that America needs to understand the difference between good and evil and right and wrong, it's now.
Here Nikki takes the role of the protagonist, saying, we stand for what's right, like a hero fighting the villains. It's all about making the right choices. This makes you want to support her because who doesn't want to root for the hero who fights for a good cause? Nikki demands moral clarity and calls you to the side of good, hoping to ignite your desire to vote for her because heroes with the moral values always triumph over the bad guys. No? And my last one, policy promises.
America has been way too divided. Now's the time to come together and say we need to unite for our brothers and sisters in Israel. We need to unite for freedom. We need to unite for democracy all around the world. And we need to unite America because we can never think that this won't happen to us on our soil.
Policy promises are the strategic artillery in a campaign. Here's why. Political strategists use them to shape the narrative to present their candidate as the harbinger of change. By proposing bold policy changes, strategists emphasize that their candidate offers a new direction and change. Where have we heard that one before? This, of course, implies that change is needed and that the current administration is incapable and should be replaced. It's a bit like a cinematic plot twist. These promises are carefully crafted to manipulate voter opinion. So whenever you hear policy promises, remember, they are not just ideas. They are calculated strategy to convince you that change is on the horizon and that their candidate is the one who holds the key. And this is where my analysis ends, not because there's not much more to talk about, but because this clip is already longer than I intended it to be. So I'm asking you again, but with all that you now know, what do you think are Nikki Haley's real intentions when she gives a seemingly spontaneous interview like this one? I leave this for you to decide, but I would be interested to hear what you think now that you have heard me out. Feel free to leave a comment in the comment section below. What I hope to have demonstrated is the fact that we humans are very easily manipulated, and I have shown you some of the ways how this can be done. If you are aware of an interesting speech or interview, could be political or business, let me know. I promise I will have a look. And if you want to help to spread the message, consider liking and subscribing or even sharing, because believe it or not, the mighty algorithms don't look kindly at this type of content. Thank you for watching.